Welcome back, everyone. It's good to be back. After taking Monday off to enjoy my vacation, I was told I couldn't keep enjoying it. I got to get back down to the cellar and work through the night for RotoCurve. So here I am back while in Arizona, but it feels good to be here. And for all of those who voted on Twitter as to what drink I should have, I just wanted to update that during the show I have a Miami Vice, which I was teaching the co-host what that was before the show. That is half strawberry daiquiri, half pina colada for all you out there. I will be enjoying that throughout the show if my plays are good. This was my first one. If my plays sucked tonight, I was hammered before the show even started. So just so everyone knows. All right, let's get to business. Don't forget to check out the free roll this Friday. That is rotocurve.com /free roll again rotocurve.com/free roll. Of course, you can check out all the NBA tools on rotocurve.com, including our first NBA tool, Josh Collacchi. I know we've got some new things at rotocurve, so you want to describe some of the new tools that we've been putting up over the last week or so?
Yeah, first things first, one of the things that we always talk about on the show, and I know all three of us talk about in our articles, is minutes. And a lot of people are asking, well, we know about the minutes per game, but can we find the trends? And that's something I put together last week, and it's a really cool tool. It's rotocurve.com/NBA-minutes-movers. And basically what this does is it takes the last 5 games and the last 10 games of every player and looks at their minutes and how they fared in terms of minutes per game. So it's not just the minutes per game over the season, it's the difference between their last 5 and last 10, and it gives you a rating. So it tells you these guys that have gotten a big boost in minutes because, as Benny talked about in a piece on RotoCurve, minutes brings money, and I think we can all agree on that. So that's one thing you definitely want to keep an eye on. Take a look at that each and every day. You see a guy that's getting a boost in minutes, that normally means he's getting a boost in roll and a good matchup. Usually that's going to lead to a low-priced player being an excellent play.
There you go. A bunch of good things going on there. And now let's introduce the man with the logo that has to be different than the rest of ours. 5 years behind the time, Benny Ricciardi.
Yeah, I keep telling these guys that I'm basically computer illiterate, but they don't believe me. So they're like, "Yeah, you just download this and do that." I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine. I got something here, so we're good to go."
There you go. We got a 9-game slate tonight. We got a bunch of interesting contests. Some of the good teams playing. I certainly love that Oklahoma City Clipper game. Actually, after this broadcast is over, I'm going to be going to one of the worst games on the slate, the Knicks and the Suns. I'm just trying to find some fantasy value in that game. There isn't a whole lot. But, guys, this slate overall, does it feel like a stars and scrubs type night, or do we think it's more of a, balanced type slate?
You want to take that, Benny?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it is kind of shaping up a little bit stars and scrubbish, but not like big time stars and scrubs. Like we're not talking about $3,000 punt plays, but there are a lot of guys. I mean, I play a lot on DraftKings. That's where I usually start my research and everything, and there are quite a few guys that we'll talk about that are in like the $4,500 to like $5,500 range. That if you throw 2 or 3 of them in your lineup, you'll be able to go get 2 of the, 8 to 10K players and put them in there and, still round out the roster with guys in the 6 or 7K range that you like. So I think that's kind of the way my roster construction is going to be going tonight.
Josh, you on board with that?
Yeah, and it's weird because when you look at the slate like this, you have guys like Curry, Westbrook, Anthony Davis, Durant, LeBron, Cousins, and you think, you know what, I'm going to have to find some cheap guys so I can go stars and scrubs. But we'll talk about why I think this is a slate that you can go mid-range and get some lower ownership percentages. And I think some of these guys with these high prices don't necessarily have good matchups, and we'll talk about why. But my first sense was to go stars and scrub, but I think it's going to be a mid-range slate for me tonight.
Man, I'm kind of feeling the stars and scrubs tonight. I mean, I write about fantasy draft where the pricing's a little bit easier, but even on DraftKings, I think now that we know that the Grizzlies are going to be shorthanded again, that certainly helped. I liked a few guys beforehand. I mean, we discussed some before the show. I think there's a lot of cheap point guards tonight, so if you want to go spend elsewhere, I think this is a good slate to do it. Let's get to the point guards. Benny, you want to start us at the position? I have a feeling I know one of the guys you like, but let's see if our thoughts match up.
Yeah, there, like you said, there's actually a lot of guys here that are in play. So I'm going to take some of the guys who I think are the good values at the bottom end. Chalmers to me is still somebody who's in play. I know it's a tough matchup for him. They're going up against Boston. Boston's usually pretty good against the point guard spot. But no matter what site you're playing on, Chalmers is still really cheap. And Connolly's out for another 3 or 4 days. So, I mean, at a $5,000 price range on, DraftKings or FanDuel, he's a guy, like right around 10K on I think he's a little below 10K on Fantasy Draft as well. You're getting a guy who's pretty solid for 30 to 35 fantasy points, even in a tough matchup here. So I still think we got to look towards Chalmers as one of the cheap guys. And then another one of the cheap guys that opened up, he's not listed as point guard on every site, but Darren Collison on DraftKings is only 4,400. We were talking about it before the show. Rondo is in, but McLemore's not. Ben McLemore's not in. There's a good chance that we might not get Bellinelli playing either. So you're going to get 30 to 35 minutes out of Darren Collison, who's already been playing 25 to 30 minutes anyway. So I think he's going to have a little bit of an uptick in his production. And again, the thing that I really like about him, the price tag on him is only 4,400. So that's incredibly cheap for a guy that's going to be seeing 30 to 35 minutes. Even though he too has a little bit of a tough matchup against Cleveland, but I do think there's going to be a lot of points in that game on both sides. So I still like both of those guys on the cheap end. The one guy I want to talk about on the high end is actually Kemba Walker today, who I think people are kind of sleeping on him. They're going up against New Orleans. New Orleans is usually a really good matchup for point guards. Pretty high scoring game. It's got about a 210 total right now. And if you look at New Orleans, the backcourt is pretty banged up. They're down to just Norris Cole, Tony Douglas, and Drew Holiday are the only three that they have available. And you got Kemba, who's basically been between 46 and 53 fantasy points over on DraftKings in his last 4 games. So he's averaging 50.5 fantasy points at a price of like 8,300. So he's basically getting you a little over 6 times value every time he steps out on the floor. Again, playing big minutes, getting a lot of shots, getting a lot of usage. And I feel like he's somebody that people are kind of shying away from today. I always feel like Kemba's actually a little under-owned for what he should be. So he's one of the guys that I am willing to pay up for, and I'll probably have on some of my tournament rosters.
Yeah, I actually don't even know if Norris Cole's supposed to suit up. Maybe that news came recently, but I saw him listed as questionable before that. So they may only have Douglas and Holiday available. So that would make it certainly very interesting on the other side to roster Holiday. But Josh, who do you like? Do you agree with those plays, or are you looking elsewhere at the point guard position?
I do like Kemba Walker a lot tonight, and the first thing that I saw this slate at point guard, of course, the first position we look at is those top 3 guys, the Russell Westbrooks, Stephen Curry, and of course Chris Paul. So I think it's something that we should look into tonight. Which of the 3 do you want to roster? Because with all the other options, I don't think it's going to be that easy to roster both of them. So I just wanted to talk about that real quick. I did some research this morning, and I want to start with Curry and why I don't think he's an excellent play against Utah. Basically, the Jazz are very, very slow-paced. And the one thing with how to beat the Jazz, as Ricky has mentioned before, is to be a jump-shooting team. But the thing is, with that slow pace, Curry has not fared very well at his price to be worth rostering tonight. He has had, let's see, he needs 55 for value. We just mentioned the pace, and I have right here. In the past, in the last 6 games against Utah, Curry has 29, 44, 53, 38, and then he has 2 games of 43 and 38.5. That's not going to cut it for me. These are in FanDuel points. That's not going to cut it for me for a guy that's priced at 10-9. Now, moving on to Westbrook and facing Chris Paul, we talk about this a lot, guys. We always talk about how Westbrook seems to be getting the lesser side of the ball against Chris Paul, as Paul seems to defend him well. And looking at his entire career, I actually printed that out in a screenshot for you guys in my article today. He only has 3 games of over 50 fantasy points or FanDuel points against Paul. That's a large sample size. It's over 20 games, I think, maybe 15 to 20 games. And he has only had about 5 times value at his salary just once. So I don't think that's something to look at. And that basically means that Chris Paul is it for me. He's trending upwards. He has at least 5 times salary in 6 of his last 8 games against Russell Westbrook. So he's the guy that I would mention of those 3. Now, I mentioned earlier, I don't necessarily think it's a stars and scrubs game. So for Kemba Walker, it's an excellent pivot. I'm definitely looking that direction.
Yeah, I agree with you on Paul. I think Paul's matchup is it's not just that he's the, by default guy to play of the big three. I think his matchup is very, very positive. I mean, this is a guy who, over the past 2 seasons in 5 games versus Oklahoma City, at least 46 DraftKings fantasy points in each. I mean, Oklahoma City ranks the bottom 6 of defensive efficiency. We know they play a fast pace. They score a lot of points, so in order to keep up with them, I mean, Chris Paul has had to basically run the whole offense, especially without Griffin. I think in the last 5 meetings, he's had at least 29 combined points and assists in each of those, which is a pretty big number. I mean, you look at Vegas, the leaders in points plus assists per night. I mean, they're usually around 29 for like the top guys. The Russell Westbrooks and that. I mean, maybe he'll be slightly higher, but Paul's certainly gotten it done. He's a phase below them in terms of pricing. What about some other cheaper options that you guys haven't matched? What about Shelvin Mack? Is anyone on board with him? I mean, you're talking about Golden State playing down in pace. How about the Utah Jazz having to play slightly up in pace? And, Golden State's a very good defensive team. We obviously know that. But where they give it up is to the point guard and power forward positions. I think where is he? 4,300 on DraftKings, 8,100 on Fantasy Draft. I think with the uptick in pace, maybe Rodney Hood sitting out, I mean, this could be a spot to take advantage of him, no?
Yeah, I don't.
Go ahead,
Go ahead. I was going to say, I don't hate him. My only problem is at the same price you can get Darren Collison over on DraftKings, and I think I like Collison in his matchup a little more. Is Max still 3,500 on FanDuel? Is he still min price, or did they finally raise him up off the floor?
He's at 3,900, I see here.
Yeah, I don't have FanDuel pricing today. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm in a banned state today, so it was difficult for me to get a hold of those.
Yeah, he's I mean, I think he's an okay, he's good for like 20 to 25 fantasy points. I don't think you get any upside out of him, which is kind of why I'd rather lean a little bit more towards Collison, because I think Collison does have the upside where, he's going to be seeing bigger minutes tonight and he can score. Mac's been a quality, cheap option to roll out there, but he really hasn't given you much more than like 20 to 24 fantasy points. So I still like Collison more. I think he's got a little bit more upside wherever you can use him. But, again, I mean, if you're looking for 20, if he usually gets you 20 to 25 in a paced-up matchup with Golden State, he could easily bump that up a little bit to 25 to 30, and then you're talking 7x value at around 4K for him. So he's definitely somebody you got to consider.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch a little more on Drew Holiday, because I think if Norris Cole sits, which it seems, about 50-50, he's almost an auto play, as his usage has risen from 27 to almost 32% without Eric Gordon, and now you factor in basically the only other guy giving him a run for his money in minutes. I mean, we could be talking about 40 minutes Drew Holiday tonight without Gordon, and that certainly is something I'm interested in, especially with Anthony Davis in a mismatch in terms of athleticism against some of their bigs. So there could be, a 2010 type double-double in his future. Also wanted to mention a few other cheap guys. Bayless, because Michael Carter-Williams is out, so I think you got to at least consider him. But how about Darren Williams' price tonight? On DraftKings, 5,200 on Fantasy Draft, he's below 10,000. It's not like he's been bad, and I know the matchup isn't great, but is this a spot where in cash you kind of have to use him at that price, or are we just avoiding it because it's Darren Williams?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to stay away from it simply because of all the other options. Now, you mentioned his price. That is very interesting. So I definitely think that it's something to take a look at because he is the leading minutes getter there. So the only problem that I have with that is it's potentially he could draw a guy like KCP on defense, but I don't think that's going to happen that often. So it makes for a decent play for sure. I think he's going to be lower owned. So if you want to get a lower owned guy in cash, I know a lot of people that play head-to-head like to look at it. I can get on board at that price, Ricky, for sure.
Well, this brings up kind of another conundrum. Let's go into this. Do you guys ever feel like there's a guy that's just so cheap that you never play or don't really like, and then you see his price and it's, kind of sways you to go in that direction? Are you the kind of person that will do it because the price says so, or are you stubborn and you're just like, if I don't play this guy, like playing this guy, at 500 more, I'm not going to play him at this? Which way do you go on that conundrum?
Yeah, I have no problem. I mean, price is one of the main things we have to be sensitive to in this game. So I have no problem playing a guy even if I don't like him if his price is, good enough. But what I usually find myself doing is I'll only play that guy if I don't have another option that I like more. Like if we're looking at like a shooting guard today that we were talking before the show, which is kind of weak, if there was a guy who is normally like, 6K and today he's 4,800 or 4,900, still in the same kind of matchup where he can get me 25 to 30 fantasy points, I think I'd be willing to roll him out there. But if there was a 7K option that I really liked more, I'd still pass him over even if his price was cheap.
What about you, Josh? Are you stubborn, or you're gonna succumb to it just because it looks so nice, that price on Darren Williams?
I think that you can all agree that I may be one of the most stubborn guys in DFS, especially in cash games. I'm the guy that looks at it and say it's still Darren Williams. Now, he's been a good player for a long time, but in the twilight of his career, I don't think he's a guy that I've necessarily targeted. The only thing is with Williams is he has been good in some games this year. He really has. If you go back and look at his game log across this season, he has had some games that have turned a decent amount of value. But for me in this slate, I don't think I'm going to go with him simply because he didn't pop up on my research at first. But at that price, I do agree with you. He's not a bad play. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I hate going down with guys that I'm not really a huge fan of, just because of that. I mean, it's kind of like yearly leagues where if a guy keeps falling and falling and falling and no one wants him, and then you take him and he's a bust, you just feel like you're the biggest idiot because, clearly there was a reason no one wanted him. I mean, here it seems like there's a reason his price is falling, even though he's been, decent. I don't want to go out on a limb for a guy and then have him be the one that burns me. So I'm with you. I'm off Darren Williams tonight. I like that price, but I can avoid it and still live with myself and sleep like a baby. Let's move on to shooting guard. I'm going to start with Nick Batum. I know that's one of Collacchi's guys, but at home, I mean, you always got to consider this guy. He's got some of the craziest splits you'll ever see. 38.3 fantasy points per game at home, 27 on the road, so we're talking, almost 10 fantasy point difference. Pell's ranked 29th in defensive efficiency to small forwards, so I had to go back and double check, but, they're, in terms of the Hornets, their four main lineups this year, meaning the ones that they've used the most commonly. Batum plays the small forward. He rarely plays shooting guard on offense, so when you look at the matchup, it is a small forward. It's a great matchup. It's a great matchup at home. I mean, pretty much he connects all the dots for me. Where are you guys going at small forward tonight? We'll start with you, Josh.
At small forward or shooting guard?
Sorry, I'm saying small forward, but yeah, shooting guard on DFS sites.
Okay, yeah, he definitely is the small forward on offense, though. That's an excellent point there. But at the two guard tonight, the only guy that I think I'm really trying to pay up for, especially with the way the pricing is, you can probably go mid-tier and still get one stud. I gotta have James Harden tonight, and he checks pretty much every box, but he's at the top of every single box for me. He gets a ton of minutes. The Houston Rockets are favored to win the highest scoring game on the night. I believe that game is number one in our game to target tool. He's first in our DVP matchup tool, which, as you guys know, the guy that has been first of late has actually been pretty good. So that's a thing to look at. He's the highest projected player in our projections and in many other projections across the industry. And on top of that, the guy's been unbelievable. He has 53 or more FanDuel points in 5 of his last 7 games. It's even higher on DraftKings. And if I'm not mistaken, he has 270 burgers in the last week, right?
I think that's correct.
Yeah, so I just don't think that I can stay away from a guy like this in cash games because he has that ability and that matchup to go off. Now, on FanDuel, I believe he's 11,000, and guys that are priced that high are really tough to spend on in tournaments because you really need north of 60 points for him to, or actually 65 points rather, for him to reach solid value in tournaments. So on a big slate where it could potentially be higher scoring, I'm not sure I'm on board with him in tournaments. And it sounds weird because he could be one of the highest finishers on the night, but I just can't see him getting over 70 on FanDuel because that's really hard to get with their scoring.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, when I wrote up this slate last night, to me it already looked like a stars and scrubs type slate, and the guys I looked at were Paul, Harden, and Durant. And if you could fit all three of them into a cash lineup, count me in with bargains that you like. Benny, where are you going at shooting guard tonight?
Yeah, as of now, I do have a good amount of Harden in my lineup, mostly because of something we talked about on one of the videos not too long ago. But when you're looking for which star you want to pay up for. One of the things that kind of helps sway my decision when guys are close is, the idea of position scarcity. And there aren't a lot of other shooting guards that I really feel comfortable coming down from. So if there's one position where I'm going to spend up on somebody to lock in points, shooting guard seems like the spot with Harden. If I do come down from Harden, the guy who kind of caught my eye has been Devin Booker. I don't know why. I don't know what's gotten into him, but over the course of the last couple games, he's been seeing 35 to 40 minutes. He's been out on the floor a ton, and he's been putting up a lot of points. And not only just the points, but he's starting to contribute across the board. He had 9 assists in the game the other night. He's been grabbing a couple more rebounds. He'll get you a steal and a block every now and then. I don't know exactly what's going on with the Brandon Knight news. I haven't heard anything. I still see him as questionable. I don't know if you guys have any more news on that. But even if Knight does play, I think Knight slides in at the point guard spot and Booker stays at the 2. Because, he's pretty much earned it right now. They've been rolling out guys like Ronnie Price and Archie Goodwin at the point guard spot. And with Knight coming back, I still think they're going to see what the kid Booker has. So I still expect him. He might not be playing 37, 38 minutes if Knight is back, but I still expect him to get 30 to 35, and I think he'll still put up some pretty good numbers at a pretty cheap price still in most of the spots. His price has come up, but he's still only around like 5K pretty much everywhere around the industry, around 10K, a little bit less than 10K, I think, on fantasy drafts. So, 30 points is really what we're looking for out of him to give us upside, and based on the last couple games that he's been playing, I definitely think he can get that for us.
Well, Phoenix would be foolish not to play him, honestly. They're horrible. They're the second to last team in the Western Conference. And so even when Knight comes back, this is their first-round pick that they're trying to develop. So there's no reason to send him back to the bench, especially because Knight doesn't play his position. I think the two of them could easily coexist. I want to mention, I think we've hit on it. I think Batum and Harden, if you're paying up, are the guys. But if you're trying to punt the position tonight, because I know a lot of us do that at shooting guard all the time, I think there are some pretty good options. I think Tony Allen for cash games makes a lot of sense. He played some big minutes the last game, 34 to be exact. He had 26 with 5 steals. While the 5 steals are kind of an anomaly, steals are kind of what Tony Allen did. I actually would argue that the points were a little bit outside of what his usual as opposed to the steals. I do like J.R. Smith. I don't think I'd use him in anything but tournaments just because it's the Kings. Randy Foye, because of the horrible Dion Waiters news, his brother was murdered in Philadelphia today, so he's going to sit out, which is understandable, obviously. So Randy Foye, the bare minimum, there should be some extra minutes for him. And I do want to mention J.J. Redick in that fast-paced game. Kind of one number stood out to me, and that's last year in a game where Blake Griffin sat out. J.J. Redick absolutely torched Oklahoma City. 48.75 fantasy points. We know that the top assist duo in the NBA is Chris Paul to J.J. Redick. So if you like Paul, you kind of got to like Redick too, because without Griffin, points got to come from somewhere. Crawford's kind of slowed down. It's not a great matchup for DeAndre, so I think there could be a lot of Paul to Redick there. Is there anything else you guys see? Wade and Aflalo are on my list, but I hardly think they're worth mentioning. I like Batum. I like Harden. I like Redick. Anything else?
Yeah, I have 2 guys I wanted to mention. You talked about one of them already, in J.R. Smith. I think we do have to mention that matchup as the 2 guard against Sacramento. And the other thing is Sacramento still allows the most 3-pointers to opposing teams. And honestly, if you watch any of J.R. Smith's career, that's what he likes to do, whether it be from about 90 feet, from 35 feet. The guy just likes to shoot. So as a shooter against Sacramento, I do think he's a nice GPP play. I can't trust him, though, because as a pure scorer, I just don't think I want to do that in the slate. And the other guy, if you do want to go stars and scrubs, the guy I like a little bit is Lance Stevenson off the bench again for Boston. He's been excellent even with a healthy Grizzlies lineup. But with Mike Conley on the bench, he's going to see the ball in his hands a lot more. The only thing, though, if he's controlling the point, with maybe he gets some minutes with Chalmers out, he's probably going to draw Avery Bradley, which, as we all know, is a tough matchup for anyone. So I do like Stevenson as a ball handler for a team that doesn't have many of them around him. So I think he has a chance to score some points off the bench. I'm just not sure I can trust something like that if Avery Bradley is on him the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, without Conley, I do like to target Stevenson as their ball handler. That's why I went with him last game. I was debating between him and JaMychal Green. I chose wrong. I won't be making that mistake again, but I still like Stevenson. Let's move to small forward. because this one's interesting tonight. There are three names to me that stand out above anyone that are all very expensive. It's the consistent Kevin Durant, and I'll bring up those numbers against the Clippers. At least 40.25 fantasy points in each of the last 10 meetings, which spans 4 seasons. So at least 40 points every time in four seasons, with half of those being 50-plus point outings. So that's pretty impressive, even though, DVP defensive efficiency numbers suggest that the Clippers are solid against small forwards. Durant's a whole different animal. LeBron James, who triple doubled in 3 quarters against his Kings team earlier this year. I assume the game flow is going to go somewhat similar, but obviously he can get it done in limited time. And Giannis without Michael Carter-Williams. So which one of those are you guys going with, and why? Let's start with you, Benny.
Yeah, I have Kevin Durant on my cash game team right now because he's just been so consistent lately. In his last 6 games here, he's basically gone for 65, 68, 57, 61, 61, and 66 DraftKings points. So even at over 10K, he's still giving you 6x value, and he's been very consistent doing it. His shots are up a little bit. He's got double-digit rebounds in every one of those games, so he has a double-double in 6 games in a row as well. He's a guy that's going to add some assists to you, 5, 6, 8, 9 over the course of these games, and he'll get you a couple blocks and steals, and we already know that the guy can score and the guy can hit three-pointers. That's pretty much what he does. So I do have him in cash. I also have some GPP teams where I swerved off of him to LeBron because LeBron's going up against Sacramento. He had 58 fantasy points on DraftKings against Sacramento earlier last week. We know that the high-usage guys tend to put up big numbers whenever they go up against the Kings. Rudy Gay is active today, which is always a good thing for a small forward because he plays no defense. So you got LeBron against Rudy Gay instead of LeBron against Omri Caspi, who's a little bit of a better defender when Gay sits out. And then even Giannis. Giannis is about $1,200 to $1,300 cheaper. Depending on what site you're on. I think on FanDuel he's up to almost 10K right now. He's at like 96. On DraftKings he's about 87, which is still pretty reasonable. We talked about it the other night, Monday night. The thing about Giannis is he's raised his scoring up from the mid-teens to the low 20s, so that's a boost for you right there. He's still grabbing the 8 to 12 rebounds a game that he's been grabbing for you for most of the season. But now that he's, point Giannis and also running the offense, he's also adding in about 8 assists per game over the last 7. So if you're going to get a guy that's going to fill up the stat sheet, and then again, like we said last time, he's a great defensive player because he's long. So he'll get you some blocks, he'll get you some steals. He's legitimately filling up all 5 of the stat categories that we like to see for daily fantasy. So, I think all 3 of them are in play. I like Giannis the most in tournaments, and I'm sticking with Kevin Durant in my cash games because he's just been so solid and so consistent for me.
Yeah, Collacchi, where do you stand on this? Are you on board?
Yeah, I think everybody knows about the Durant play, and I agree with both of you. I think he is a good cash option if you are going stars and scrubs, and of course LeBron. But I wanted to talk about a guy that I think is going to go way under the radar tonight, and he shouldn't be, and that's Carmelo Anthony. He faces the Suns, who, of course, we know is one of the faster-paced teams in the NBA. They're terrible on defense. I have him as 27th against opposing 3 forwards. Anthony is 5th in our matchup tool tonight, and honestly, if you look at what he's done of late, you're just kind of surprised that he's on FanDuel especially, the fourth priced small forward. So it's something to look at as a pivot from the rest of those top stars. He's going to be lower owned. His last 4 games, he has 44 more FanDuel points. I think he has over 50 in 3 of the last 4 on DraftKings. So you're looking at a guy that has a chance to have similar upside to those other guys, but he's going to cost close to 500 or even 1,000 more, depending on what site you're on. The other small forward I was looking at is a guy that played for the Sixers, and it's funny that I mentioned that because that lineup just was announced. They're starting Ish Smith, Hollis Thompson, Bob Cove, who I'm going to talk about, Robert Covington, Jeremy Grant, and Noel. But Noel is on a 25-minute limit tonight, so that boosts up guys like Jeremy Grant, who should be playing the 4 or the 5 when they go small, and a guy off the bench like Rashawn Holmes. But I like Covington tonight because he has that elite matchup against Houston. They're one of the worst teams against small forwards. We've been targeting the 3s against them pretty much all season long. And Covington's been playing a ton of minutes. And with minutes comes points. Benny's a big advocate of that, and I think we all agree with that. And the thing that Covington has done of late with those minutes, he's put up 3 straight games of 30 or more DraftKings points. So that's something to take a look at. He had that excellent matchup. He can shoot definitely from beyond the arc. In a fast-paced game, I definitely want to get a piece of that, and it's not too expensive.
That feels like a launch city game for Robert Covington. I mean, it sounds like Stauskas is out then, right?
He was questionable this morning. If he's not starting, that means he usually doesn't play too many minutes. I don't think it's something that's going to take that many minutes or shots away from Covington. He was just kind of tapping the Thompson's minutes, if anything.
And he's the other launcher there. So, I mean, if you're looking for someone who's not afraid to put shots in the air and is going to have plenty of opportunity to do so tonight in a faster-paced game, I agree with you. There's your tournament option right there, Robert Covington. That's a good call there. I want to mention some other guys with an uptick in pace. Gordon Hayward. I'm looking at that Rodney Hood situation. I don't know if you guys have seen anything on that, but I think I like Hayward regardless against a Golden State team that obviously is going to speed them up. I mean, basically anyone they play speeds them up since they are bottom in pace. I kind of like Derek Williams in the same boat with Carmelo Anthony because Lance Thomas has been ruled out, so I think there's some minutes to be had behind them, and the Suns are so bad. I mean, they could get blown out by anyone. So if this game all of a sudden isn't close early, I think Williams can play some extra minutes and be a big point scorer off the bench. And a guy that, if you can't afford a high money small forward, I think Tobias Harris is actually fine tonight. I mean, he plays a majority of his minutes at the power forward. So, I mean, you're looking at a matchup with Dallas and Chandler Parsons, good defender. They're good in defensive efficiency and fantasy points allowed to small forwards. But most of the time, you're getting a matchup with Tobias and Dirk. And Tobias, clearly the superior athlete there. Dirk's about 45 years old at this point. So I think Harris is actually a fine mid-tier option. I think if you're paying up, I like KD. This might be one of the first few nights in a while that I'm not going to have a lot of Giannis. I mean, Miami, you look at it, the hole in their defense is small forward, but he doesn't necessarily play as small forward, and I'm not sold that a small forward is going to be guarding him. So it's kind of an interesting matchup for him. Are you guys going to have a lot of Giannis tonight, or is he kind of a secondary option for you for the first time in a while?
Yeah, he's definitely not the main small forward that I have on most of my teams. Like I said, I got Durant and Cash. He's the guy that I kind of built a lot of my cash rosters around today. But I do have some Giannis sprinkled in tournaments because, I mean, he can go off for 70 fantasy points and have a triple-double for you. And if he does that and I have no exposure to him, I'm going to wind up crying. So,
People in the chat room are saying that Carmelo Anthony may or may not play. I don't know if that's true, but apparently he's questionable in some way, shape, or form. So that could be why many have not been on him. But let's keep an eye on that because obviously if he plays, he's worthwhile. But go ahead, Josh. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, when you look at Giannis's price on FanDuel, it's $9,600, as Benny mentioned earlier. I know he's one of our favorite players. I know he's one of my favorite players, of course. But for just $500 more, you can get LeBron James. So for me, I think if you're going to use a guy in that price range in cash games, it definitely should be LeBron. And when you look back at the history of DFS, I'm sure you guys can back this up. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, so this is a little bit anecdotal. But guys that have a huge price jump usually don't meet that value in the first game. Now, of course, that is not dependent on the matchup, things of that nature, but it's just something to keep an eye on. So, especially for Miami, which is not an excellent matchup, I think he's a fade for me tonight. I just hope I don't regret it because, like Benny, I will definitely end up crying.
Yeah. And I just want to add in real quick. I mean, I'm looking while Josh was talking here. I don't see anything that says Carmelo Anthony is even in doubt of playing tonight. So I don't know. Whoever saw that, I mean, if you have a source, throw it in chat so people can look at it. But I'm looking on Twitter here, and I'm looking at some of the local New York beat writers that I follow. I don't see anything that says Melo's not going to be playing.
Well, you can't believe everything you hear. I shouldn't have said it on air, but I am quite the I can't keep the secret. So I hear something, I say something, but it looks like Melo's just fine. I like Derek Williams either way. I definitely like Derek Williams more against a terrible Phoenix team if he sits out. I should note, drink number 1 has gone down. My Miami Vice. we are now finished with, which brings up the question I want to ask you guys. What is your favorite tropical drink? If you're at a tiki bar, what's your go-to? Are you guys pina colada guys or margaritas, or what are you going to?
Benny, I want to hear yours first because I have to think about this for sure.
I mean, I'm pretty much boring. I'll just go with straight coconut rum if I'm in the island somewhere.
Okay.
Coconut rum with a little bit of Coke or Pepsi is usually what I'll go with down
Now,
there.
would you
So
prefer that out of a coconut if that's an option?
I mean, it depends where I am. If there's nobody else around to see me, yeah, I'm fine with that. If I'm like hanging out with the wife and on like an island with like 17 people in the Caribbean somewhere, sure. But in public, yeah, no, probably not going to be drinking anything with an umbrella sticking out of it or a flamingo or anything like that. Yeah, it's.
I was actually disappointed I couldn't find an umbrella to have sitting out of this because you can't really tell with a solo cup what exactly it is. Josh, you had time to think now. Did that affect your decision?
Well, I was just going to say Pacific Cool or Capri Suns. I don't know if that counts as a tropical drink. But after hearing Benny talk about drinking a coconut in a public place, part of me wants to drive up to New Jersey, New York, pick Benny up, go to the mall, and just have like coconut milk just chilling in the middle of the food court. Benny, you in?
Yeah, what the hell? I mean, it is,
Well, if the whole Lunchables thing didn't prove that you were still 8 years old in your mind, the Capri Sun thing definitely does.
Why do you think I get them? So I can have Capri Suns.
So here's a thing from Twitter. The Mellow rumors are due to the Vegas line shift, which does make a little bit of sense there. So apparently there's been a decent little shift. I got to check on exactly what the shift is, but that would make some sense. All right, let's move on to power forwards. We haven't hit on that yet. JaMychal Green, yes or no?
Yeah, let's move on to center. It's not even worth talking about anymore. No, I mean, listen. I'll make the case for him because I'm a big fan of him. So I'll go out on a limb here with it tonight. The thing that I think people are forgetting is Chris Anderson is out right now. So JaMychal Green was basically the backup to Chris Anderson and Zebo. So with Chris Anderson out, he's going to see more minutes. But even when Chris Anderson was playing, obviously the 50-point game from last game stands out when you look at the game logs. But in 2 of the 3 games before that, he still put up about 24 or 25 fantasy points, in less minutes than we expect him to get tonight. His price is still like $4,500 over on DraftKings. I know he's still below $10K over on Fantasy Drafts because I have him in my lineup over there as well. He's just basically too cheap for the role that he has right now. They're going up against Boston, who has always struggled against big guys. The one concern I have is that Boston does have a bunch of their big guys banged up. Selinger's banged up, Olenek's banged up. So if they go small, I think Zebo is playing. So if they go small, you're going to have JaMychal Green. I
think Zebo's out. I think he's done.
Oh, all right. Well, then we really don't need to talk about anybody else.
All of JaMychal. I'm with you.
100% JaMychal Green exposure. I mean, I'm not expecting him to go for another 50 fantasy points. So anybody who's thinking that that's what he's going to give you every night, that's a little, I mean, Ricky had a good tweet the other day when everybody was complaining about the 370 points you needed to cash on Monday or Tuesday night. Chalk plays do not go for 10x every single time. And I think Patty Mills taught a lot of people that lessons last night. He was 35, 40% owned. They don't always go off for 40. Just because the guys from the Nets did it on Saturday, then everybody in the world on Memphis did it on Monday, those are different situations. The thing about the Memphis situation and even the Nets situation is you were taking the high-usage guys off those teams. In the Memphis case, you took all 5 starters off there. So anybody who you put in there that was only costing you like, 45, 4,600, those guys were all going to outperform. With the Nets the other day, you were putting 2 guys at minimum price in there when you took Brook Lopez and Thad Young, who are the 2 best offensive options, off the floor. So, of course, you're going to get better numbers out of that. With Patty Mills last night, you were putting a guy in there who still had Kawhi Leonard, still had LaMarcus Aldridge, and still plays on the Spurs where everybody plays 24 minutes to begin with. So not all of these, cheap punt plays are created equal. But in JaMychal Green's case, if there's no Zebo and there's no Chris Anderson, he's got to play a ton of minutes here again. So even at 4,500, I wouldn't expect another 50 fantasy points out of him, but I definitely think he gets us 27 to 30 and gives us, 6 or 7x value on his price.
Well, speaking of situations where guys being out are going to benefit him, it's official. Norris Cole is out. Orlando Johnson will start next to Drew Holiday tonight.
Orlando Johnson. Replacements?
He very well may have been. Was he the guy who put the glue on his hand to catch?
That's what I thought too.
The wide receiver. Yep.
Yeah, I'm almost
Oh.
positive, exactly. But yeah, Drew Holiday, that's got to move him to like close to the top of our boards, right? I mean,
Yes, definitely.
there's the minutes guaranteed. There's some production guaranteed without Cole. Gotta like that. Is there anything else, Kalachi, you see at power forward that's worthwhile? Because I have some names, but I don't feel particularly great about any of them besides one other than Green.
Yeah, I have some other guys that I wanted to mention, but before I do that, I did look at the line. It was some significant movement. The Knicks opened at a 3-point favorite, and right now the Suns are favored by two. Now, you could look at that two ways. It could mean Carmelo is out, but that also could mean Brandon Knight is playing. I know we practice. He does have a chance to play a lot of minutes, so you have to look at that both ways. Personally, I think it's more towards Brandon Knight being active rather than Carmelo being out. But a line swing that much without news definitely indicates something's going to come. So be sure to keep an eye out on that. Moving on to power forward, I had Tobias written down as well. He's a power forward on FanDuel. I like him just like Ricky does. He's under 6K, and for a guy that's playing that amount of minutes, we're looking at 39, 36, and 38 in his last three. You're just going to have to take a look at him. Now, you add in that excellent matchup against the Mavericks, who were a little bit below average, and they do have Dirk Nowitzki, who, as Ricky said, is 900 years old and can't defend anybody right now. I think that turns into a good play, especially in cash games, because you're looking at a guy with all those minutes. It's going to mean some production. And the other guy, I feel like I mentioned him almost every game, Jeremy Grant, again. For cash game. Now, the only problem is you can only fit one other power forward on FanDuel, and chances are you're not going to want to use two or three on DraftKings. So with your Michael Green there, if you want to go off of him, which I guess maybe is a game theory play, GPPs is worth it, but I still think he's going to be one of the top values on the night. I do like Grant because he's going to be playing a lot of four against Houston, and as we all know, Houston is 30th against power forwards.
Yeah, I actually want to hit on a point real quick that you just brought up with the game theory thing. I think people overthink this sometimes. If you have a guy that's this cheap that you're so sure is going to get you like 5, 6, 7x value, that's not the place to make the swerve in your lineup. You know,
Yep.
we talked about it the other day with the Memphis situation where they had all those guys that came in. The way to make a swerve in a lineup like that is to take all these guys that you know are going to get you 7, 8, 9 times value, because you literally cannot win without them in your lineup. And then the way to game theory to make a change is, well, the other night everybody was on Giannis because he had been going off. So the game theory thing to do was not use Giannis and use Kevin Durant or some other high-priced stud that you can now afford with all those 3 or 4K players in. I am all for going off a 7 or 8K chalk play, you know, that you think is going to be high owned. And I'm all for fading a guy like a Patty Mills last night who you think has a chance not to reach value. But if you're going to give a guy, you know, who you know can produce a 6, 7, 8x, you know, like to me, JaMychal Green's floor tonight is probably 6x, which isn't going to kill you at all. His ceiling could be 10x like he did the other night. Not that I think he gets there, but if you have a guy who you think is that solid of a value play, that's not the guy that you go away from in game theory. Like, I feel like people make that mistake all the time. It's like, oh, well, he's going to be 60% owned. Yeah, but you know what? You're going to be in the bottom 40% if you're one of the guys that doesn't use him. So sometimes there is, you know, I am all for the contrarian life. You guys know that. I always try to figure out who the chalk is and play them in cash and then do something completely different in my GPP lineups to try to be unique. But I think JaMychal Green's going to be one of those guys that's in both of those lineups tonight, and I'm just going to play everybody else 7-on-7 because I think if you don't do it, you're going to be in a really bad spot at the end of the night.
It's something that we always talk about, Benny, is you can be contrarian without being stupid. And I think this is one of those situations because Ricky and I talk about it all the time. The reason that you use game theory is to try to get that top lineup. The chances of tonight having JaMychal Green as that top lineup are very high. I think we all agree on that, right?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's one reason, too, just kind of plug him in. You don't necessarily have to play him in every single lineup for those guys that are multi-entering. I do think if you're playing 10 or more lineups, you might want to get one because you never know. It could have a bad game, something like that. But in the bulk of your lineups, don't go away from this guy if you don't think that he's just going to have a horrible game because, like Benny just said, there's big ways to go contrarian in other directions because the chances of this guy being the winning lineup tonight, like the other night, are very high.
Well, we can have an example from tonight's slate actually. Whereas Jermichael Green, there's literally no one else active
Yeah.
as their
Mm,
bigs. I mean, we're talking no Zebo, no Gasol, no Chris
mm,
Anderson. But in another situation, even on his own team, Mario Chalmers, just Conley's out for in terms of guards, really. And there's a brutal matchup. I mean, Boston has been awesome against opposing point guards. So if you're
mm.
looking for someone to fade on that team, I mean, you go with the guy in a brutal matchup that gets a little boost, but not a boost like Green, who has to literally do everything in the front court for them.
Yeah. And we also saw Chalmers' price come up. So it's not
Yeah.
like he's a $4,500 play again today where you're like, man, even on a bad game, he's going to get me 6 or 7x. He's up to 53, 5,400, which isn't a huge price jump, but again, it's $700, $800. So now if he has a bad game and gets you 30, he's only 5 or 6x. You can find somebody else who's 5 or 6x. On a good game for Jermichael Green, though, if he gets you 40 fantasy points at only 42 or 4,500, like he is on some of these sites, there's not a lot of other guys that can go 10x. Even if you pick another guy who has a great game tonight, I mean, how often we don't even have nights all the time where we have a guy that goes 10x, and definitely not at a power forward position. So if you want to pay up for like a Boogie Cousins, you legitimately need 100 fantasy points, 107 fantasy points at a Boogie Cousins to give you the same value that you get from a Jermichael Green. So Jermichael Green on a dollar per dollar basis actually has a higher ceiling tonight, than DeMarcus Cousins, even though Cousins overall is probably going to be the highest scorer at the position, or Anthony Davis or something like that. That's why it's tougher at that spot. At point guard, I think you can find another guy who can get you 6 or 7x, like Chalmers is likely to get you. So I agree with what Ricky's saying. You want to be contrarian, you want to do something that other people aren't doing. I think that's a better spot to try to find somebody else as opposed to with Jermichael Green, who we know is the only person they have as a big guy there.
Yeah, and another spot to do it could be pairing him with another power forward. I mean, there are some other
Mhm.
options on this slate, and there certainly are ones with upside. Let's put it that way. I feel like there's a guy that I mention every single show, but if there was ever a matchup for him to have upside, how about Derek Favors against
Yep.
Golden State? I think he's my favorite of the Utah plays. I mentioned Mack, I mentioned Hayward, but I think Favors is the guy. Not only does I mentioned point guard and power forward have been their spots to give up fantasy points this year. But you look back in this exact matchup, I mean, 35.3 fantasy points per game last year and 37.9 this year. And I think it's 6 total matchups against Golden State. So that's a decent little sample size. I mean, 6 games with their current roster construction. I think Favors is in a good spot to get it done against them. What I like about him is he does everything. So, even if he has an off shooting night, you can still get the blocks, the steals, the rebounds. So I do like Favors. His price is a little high, so I think he's better for tournaments, but I certainly like him. And how about Anthony Davis now, who it's him and Drew Holiday basically carrying that whole offense? I mean, you look at that starting lineup, there's 3 holes. There's Orlando Johnson, I think it was Cunningham, and Ashik. So
Yep.
it's two guys doing a majority of their scoring against a Charlotte team that struggles against power forwards. I mean, Al Jefferson can't compete with him in terms of athleticism. So I think Davis, if you're going to go in a different direction, it's hard to argue that he doesn't have the same kind of upside that any of the other superstars have. Am I right there? Or do you agree?
Yeah, definitely, because that usage now is just going to be insane. We talk about it all the time, Ricky, with the Bulls, how it's a two-man game when
Yep.
Jimmy Butler was out. It's going to be the same way. I mean, I don't know who's coming off the bench for the Pelicans that's going to score a ton of points. I mean, Ryan Anderson is by himself, right? So it's basically just going to be Davis, Anderson, and Drew Holiday. So don't forget to put it Ryan Anderson. As Benny said the other night, I agree with him then, and I agree with him again now if we think that he's going to be a higher usage guy, because off the bench, he's got to play. Orlando Johnson and Dante Cunningham aren't going to play 40 minutes, and definitely not a Sheik going to play 40 minutes. So
Agreed. And the last guy I want to mention at the position is Kevin Love. I think against Sacramento, everyone's in play. I think Love, if I'm not mistaken, did not have a great game the last time against Sacramento while Irving and Braun went off. But I don't think that continues over the long haul. I think Love has a decent chance to get it done. The question is, can the Kings stay in the ballgame? Does anyone have anything else to say about power forward tonight?
Debo is out. That's officially. That's the only other thing I have about the position. So.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on to center. I think we're going to be different on center tonight, actually. I think there are some interesting options tonight. I think Andre Drummond's too cheap. How about that? Even Al Jefferson on a minutes limit. I mean, you look at this $4,800 price tag, and his minutes limit is 25 minutes. And even, healthy Al Jefferson really only plays 30 minutes. So we're getting, most of his usual production. And he's clearly, a $7,000, $8,000 player on DraftKings, like $14,000 player on Fantasy Draft when he's healthy and playing at full. And we've almost got him at full strength. I mean, he played 25 minutes last game, which was the most he's played since he's returned. He's facing a Pelicans team that is awful against opposing centers. I think only Philadelphia's allowed more fantasy points. You worry about this guy on back-to-backs now because that seems like, when they're going to ease him. But he's averaging 27.5 fantasy points the last 2 games, which at this price would basically be 6 times value. So it's hard to argue against him as he gets healthier, I think. Are you guys on board with taking that risk with a guy coming off injury, or do you like something else better? Let's start with you, Benny.
Yeah, I actually am taking a risk in my tournaments tonight with a guy coming off injury, but the guy I'm looking at is Hassan Whiteside, who is going to be in for today. Milwaukee's been horrible at stopping big men all season long. Greg Monroe's not really a true center. Whiteside really is. I don't even know who their backup center is. That would probably be the guy that Whiteside plays since he comes off the bench. But lately what we've seen, I feel like this should be a close game. And what we've seen from Whiteside lately is he'll come in at the 5-minute mark of the first quarter and then play most of the second quarter. Come in at the 5-minute mark of the third quarter and then play most of the end of the game as long as it's close. He's a guy that's been putting 40, 50 fantasy points up there. His price is a little high at $8,300, so I think his ownership is going to be incredibly low. But again, when he plays undersized centers, this guy is a block machine. If he gets 5 blocks for you, that more than makes up for the points that I think you're going to wind up losing, on top of the fact that he's going to get you, close to a 15 and 15 double-double. So he could easily give you 45 to 50 fantasy points tonight at a really low ownership rate for tournaments, and people are going to be off him because he was injured up until like an hour or so ago today. So I really like him as a tournament option. I agree with your call on Andre Drummond. I think that he's another guy that I really like. Dallas right now has Zaza, who's basically only playing 9 or 10 minutes a game. David Lee has been playing some center for them. I don't think either one of those guys are going to be able to contain Drummond. And then the one guy that I'm sure we're going to mention, but we haven't yet, Alex Len's still in play for me too. Playing high 30s minutes. Price is still pretty reasonable. He's 65, I think, over on DraftKings. Other sites, he's in that same range around there where 35 to 40 fantasy points would be a phenomenal game for him. He's got back-to-back 50 fantasy point games, played, 38, 39 minutes in those games. And even the floor games, the bad games that he's had recently, have still been in the low 30s. So if he's going to get you a number in the low 30s on a bad game and has the chance to get me 50-point upside for, 6,500 or so, I still got to have exposure to him on a lot of rosters too.
Yeah, he's coming off 5 straight double-doubles, so you want to talk about a floor. I mean, this is basically since he's been moved into the starting lineup, which was next to Chandler. I know Chandler's hurting. I haven't seen anything. Is Chandler in tonight?
I think so. I haven't seen anything either. So.
Okay, but either way, I mean, this is when he got moved into the starting lineup pretty much for good. He's taken advantage, and Nick's ranking the bottom half of fantasy points allowed to opposing centers. Porzingis looks like he's going to be on a minutes limit. Even if he's at power forward, he'll probably have limited minutes against him. So I agree with Len. Collacchi, who do you like tonight?
I actually have Al Jefferson written down as well. I do think he's worth the risk because his minutes have come up. Like Ricky said, he's not going to be a guy that plays over 30 again because he's not that player anymore. But he's very efficient in those minutes, so I do like him. The other guy I like is the center for the Rockets. But before I get into him, I saw some Rockets-Sixers news I definitely think is worth sharing. Michael Beasley is going to get some burn with the second unit tonight, and I want to mention him. Don't go out and do it yet tonight. I don't think it's worth it yet. But every year for the past 5 or 6 years in a row, Beasley has had a game where he's gone nuts. Wait for the Rockets to rest somebody. It's coming. I'm telling you, he's going to have it again this year. So be sure to keep that in the back of your mind for later on when he's available at a lower price and the Rockets rest people, maybe on a back-to-back, because he can put up a lot of fantasy points. The other thing is, I think it downgrades a guy we talked about earlier. The Sixers apparently are going to start Robert Covington guarding James Harden. Now, you guys know a lot about Harden in terms of drawing fouls. He does this thing where he basically isolates at the top of the key, does a pump fake, and draws a foul really quickly, and really can get some guys into foul trouble. For those of you that have rostered Covington, you know he's a guy that fouls a lot. So I think this basically takes him away as a cash play. I know it burns me to say that, but I can't take that risk in foul trouble because a guy like Harden can definitely put you on the bench in a hurry. And we've seen Covington get 2 fouls in 2 minutes, and then he doesn't play till halftime. So that's definitely something to take a look at. I wanted to ask you guys about that, though. Does that worry you, something like that, where you know a guy's going to be defending a player like Harden who draws a lot of fouls?
For me, definitely. For me, 100%. I always worry about that with guys against Boogie Cousins. I
Hmm.
mean, that's usually my main concern. I think Harden is the Cousins of shooting guards. I mean, as you mentioned, a lot of it is ISO, and the guy I think leads the NBA in free throws by a hefty margin. So it's kind of hard to ignore who's guarding Harden, which I think brings up the question: is Hollis Thompson then a cash game play? Because someone's got to take the shots if he's in foul trouble, and even if he's not. I think Hollis Thompson is one of their top offensive options, especially if you consider Nerlens Noel on a 25-minute limit. I don't know how Benny feels about the whole Harden guarding someone thing, but I want to hear your opinions on both that and Hollis Thompson tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of along the same lines that you were. Right when you said it, when Josh asked about Harden, the first name that popped into my head was Boogie Cousins too. I have downgraded people who I thought were going to guard him all season long because him and Harden both have the same ability to, put guys in foul trouble and put them on the bench. So if you're paying up for anybody who's somewhat expensive, you can't take that risk that they're going to be, on the bench in the middle of the first quarter with 2 fouls or something like that. So anytime you have to pay up a little bit for a guy that's guarding somebody who draws a lot of fouls, that's always something that takes them out of consideration for me in cash games because you just can't afford to have that, 4-point first half out of a guy that you're paying up for.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go. Let's just round out the center position. We mentioned Drummond. I want to mention the last two to face Zaza Pachulia. Jokic 38.5 fantasy points and DeAndre Jordan a 23 and 20 double double. So as you mentioned, Zaza limited minutes and David Lee apparently isn't scaring anyone. Also wanted to mention because I kind of like him in tournaments. Andrew Bogut
Yep.
in what looks like a bad matchup, but it actually is a positive for Bogut because now he's going to play a lot of minutes. I mean, you look at a team with twin towers like Favors and Gobert. Everyone talks about their small lineup that dominates everyone. Well, you can't really go small against that team and try and outrun them, especially if they then slow it down because then they're posting you up just about every time. So I think Andrew Bogut's going to have to flirt with 30 minutes, and we're talking about a guy over a fantasy point per minute this year, and he's eclipsed 30 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 meetings against Gobert, which is,
Mhm.
interesting. And as Collacchi's mentioned, I mean, Gobert has been getting torched by his standards this season. He hasn't exactly been, the Pelicans, but he hasn't been great, and he has given up some nice games. And I think with a ton of minutes for Bogut, he makes a lot of sense for me. And I did want to mention DeAndre Jordan, but I think he's a tournament-only option. He's kind of had some mixed results against the Thunder, but he's coming off that 23 and 20 game. He has 2 double-doubles in the last 3 meetings versus the Thunder without Griffin. I mean, we're talking about 18 and 17 and 20 and 18 in his last 2. So he's been a bit of a monster. I like his price best on fantasy draft, 7,700 on DraftKings. I'd probably rather pay for Drummond. I think in tournaments you could pair both of them, or you could do a whole bunch of things at center, and that's who I like. Anyone else want to say anything else about center?
Real quick, I do want to mention Bogut. I do like Bogut a lot tonight, and it's really odd because Utah does play defense very well. But Ricky just said it. He's a fantasy point per minute guy. He's going to probably play 30 more minutes because you can't go small against the Jazz, and if you do, you'll probably get burned by those bigs. He's actually my bold call, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But I think Andrew Bogut is safe to use because he's going to play a lot of minutes. He's a guy that you can fit a lot of superstars with because his price is not that low. And on a site like FanDuel, where Cousins is actually over 11,000, Bogut makes for an excellent play at about 42% of that price.
There you go. Let's, while we still have a minute, let's get on to our bold plays for the night. I hope you guys both have one. Kalachi, would you like to start us off? Go bold or go home. Let's see what you got tonight.
Well, I was looking at my sheet and I had a typo. I write Andre Bogut, but I don't think he's in the league right now. So I'm going to go with Andrew Bogut, 30 fantasy points against Utah. I think he's going to hit 6x tonight.
There you go. I'm a big believer in Bogut. I had him as a cash option until Michael Green happened, and now I'm considering if I'm going to do both or just Green. Benny, who do you like, and what's your bold prediction tonight?
I'm gonna give you guys a 2-for-1 tonight. One of my favorite combos that I put in and started a lot of my lineups with. I think you get 80 plus fantasy points tonight out of Jermichael Green and Alex Len together.
Wow, a 2-for-1. I've got two guys that I like. I'll just stick to one of them. I think you get 50 fantasy points from Nick Batum tonight in a great matchup against the Pelicans. I really think that those home away splits are a thing. So I like Batum. The other thing I was going to say is I wouldn't be shocked if J.J. Redick scores 30 real points. I feel more confident about Batum, but I am going to have some Redick shares in tournaments. Let's finish things out. Again, everyone, go play the free roll. That's rotocurve.com/free roll. I know I'm going to be around to chat for a few minutes. I'm not sure if you guys are, but you can hit us up in the chat. I will be at the Suns-Knicks game tonight, so if you can see the guy with the big red face, the sunburn's starting to hit me, so I'll probably stick out like a sore thumb in that crowd. Maybe we'll have my RotoCurve shirt on as well, so point and laugh. Maybe send me pictures if you see me. Any final words for tonight's slate, gentlemen?
The only thing I have is shout out to Ghost Gardner. He said Pacific Cooler for the win. So that's a gold star for you, sir. Gold star.
Well, I'm on to have my second Miami Vice. Again, if my advice is good tonight, I only drank one during the show. If my advice is bad, I was loaded the whole time and had no clue what I was saying. Until next time, we're out.